What needs to change next in your business? Do you think there's an objective right answer to this question, or is it simply a matter of preference? Tell me if this story sounds familiar. You could describe what your business does every day, but instead of one area, you see a lot of areas for improvement. You've been to conferences, you've listened to talks, you've implemented some things, but you haven't always seen the dramatic improvements that you're expecting, and it's not clear why. Today we're going to try to answer this question, and in the process, I'm going to give you a mental model for optimizing your business. Years ago, I became fascinated by a management practice known as the theory of constraints. It was popularized in the world of manufacturing by Eli Goldratt in his book, The Goal. It tries to answer the simple question of what to change. Every business has a lot of problems. But before we decide what to work on, don't we need a focusing mechanism that will show us the actual impact of every problem on the overall performance of the business so we can decide what to optimize? Not only do you have limited capacity and your team has limited tolerance for unnecessary change, the theory of constraints also argues that some improvements made in certain places in the business have no impact on the overall performance of the system. To understand why, let's look at the three core principles that the theory of constraints is based on. First, every business is a goal-oriented system. The processes work together in order to achieve value, not independently of each other. Second, value is created at the end of the process when the customer experiences the outcome that they hired you for, not earlier in the process. Third, the output of the system is governed by a few key leverage points, bottlenecks, or constraints. A constraint is anything that prevents or limits a system from achieving its goal. It's obvious that your business has a constraint. If it didn't, you'd be as wealthy as Jeff Bezos. But not every problem in your business is a constraint. At any given point in time, one of them is the primary constraint. The key claim of theory of constraints is that making improvements elsewhere will not increase the overall performance of the system. The only way to do that is to increase the flow through the constraint. In the system pictured here, you can see that the constraint is part of the system with the lowest throughput. We can add capacity above it, which only causes a surplus of work in progress. We can add capacity below it, which isn't used because there isn't enough work to feed it. Only increasing the capacity of the constraint changes the output. This is why many business improvements fail to produce an overall improvement. They aren't focused on the primary constraint of the business at that point in time. So identifying that constraint is critical for optimizing the performance of your business. So the first clue to the question of what to change is to start with the constraint. Now let's apply this to your property management company. I'm going to start by predicting the top 3 constraints that I think you'll need to address first, and then we'll look at a process for identifying the next constraint. Chances are the first constraint you need to address is you. The scarcest resource at any startup is management bandwidth. In most organizations, daily work takes up all of the oxygen. Improvement of daily work gets low priority. So the first step is to allocate resources for the process of improvement. This means designating someone with the time, expertise, knowledge of how your processes work, and the authority to make changes. Some companies employ consultants to catalyze this process, but it can also be a process-minded, tech-savvy person on your team with the time and mandate to do this work. Just make sure that you have this person in place. Realistically, this is a quarter-time job for one person for 2 to 3 months at least. The second constraint is probably understanding your business as a system. Without this, you can't see the factory floor well enough to optimize it. The goal of every business is profit, which is a byproduct of creating customer value. Let's take a look at customer value in property management. Your primary customer is the owner, who wants profitable, hands-off investing in real estate. Your secondary customer is the tenant, who wants convenient access to great places to live. Your business needs to create this value efficiently to satisfy customers and make a profit. What are the points where your business creates and captures this value? Arguably, the value is created and captured for both parties during occupancy. When a great tenant moves in, everyone gets the desired outcome. When the property is occupied and rents are flowing in, you're collecting that check. Aside from this, you may make revenue off of maintenance or real estate commissions, but the lion's share of your captured value comes from maintaining occupancy. As a side note, if you think your renewal rate could be better, keeping properties in this loop longer, there is no higher leverage place to start. Upstream of that, you have a lot of other processes that go into creating this value. Everything that goes into turning over the property and marketing to owners. So map out your processes. You want to understand where value is created in your system and how work flows from one process to the other. The third constraint that you'll probably need to deal with is unplanned work. Unplanned work is all the stuff that doesn't fit in the neat little diagram I just showed you. It's invisible, it's hard to track, but it can kill your business. It is impossible to optimize your business if your schedule is dominated by unplanned work. Thankfully, once you recognize the problem, there are some ways to deal with it. Track it. Make it visible. This helps you separate the urgent stuff from the stuff that can actually wait. Schedule it. If possible, plan it out in advance before it's urgent and make it obey the same rules as all of your planned work. Contain it. Time box it, or dedicate a resource to handling it so the rest of the business isn't as impacted by it. Prevent it. Mistakes are a big source of unplanned work, so reduce those as much as possible. All right, if you've allocated the resources, mapped your business as a system, and tamed the beast of unplanned work, you're ready to find the next constraint. Look for where work is piling up in the organization, and then find what is blocking it. If work is backing up or you're missing deadlines, you probably have an internal constraint. If it's all piling up in one place, that process is the constraint. If it seems to be cropping up in random places, the constraint is probably not a process, but actually a person with their hands in too many things. But what if you don't see work piling up anywhere in the organization? It could be that you just don't have visibility. But it might mean that you're operating under capacity, which means you have an upstream external constraint. This could be in marketing. Problems with your advertising, web presence, or pricing is leading to a lack of leads. Or it could be in sales. Problems with positioning or follow-up are contributing to a poor conversion rate. If you have an external constraint, you probably want to focus there. But what if you want to make sure that your internal systems can handle some load before turning on sales and marketing? You can do a thought experiment to find out what the internal constraint might be by asking, if we ramp to 10 new properties per month, where will the wheels fall off first? Your constraint is probably in the area of onboarding or make-readies, because these processes have high upfront costs. Once you've identified the constraint, the next step is to optimize it. If you haven't already, document the process, because if it's squirrely, you can't optimize it. A side benefit is that you will always find some ways to simplify the flow, standardize the decision points, and prevent mistakes, and your team will have less to keep in their heads. By the way, there's a free template at the end that you can use for documenting a process, so I'm not going to dig into that too much right now. Second, identify the most time-consuming parts. Your team can definitely tell you what these are, so just ask them. Third, prevent mistakes. Work should not flow backward. It tends to create chaos when it does. My son suggested, when I explained this to him, that a better illustration here might be Humphrey the Lost Whale, if you remember that story. Look for gaps where the ball might get dropped. It's better to put a quality check in place than to risk creating urgent, unplanned work. Next is the fun part. Reduce waste. 3 tactics you can employ. Subtract, compact, and automate. Subtract non-value adds. These are the extra moving parts that don't add value for your customers. A lot of things can be eliminated by asking, are my customers willing to pay for this? Compact unnecessary delays. Unpredictable delays wreak havoc on your capacity. Anything you can do to tame the flow of work and prevent delays will increase your capacity. Automate time-consuming, repetitive tasks. The low-hanging fruit here is usually around data entry, where the process needs data. Can you get the data into the process automatically? Communication. How much of your communication can be templated? Can you automate that? Handoffs. Ensuring that work moves seamlessly between team members. Decisions and logic. Change the process automatically based on the data that you've entered, and save human judgment for the real edge cases. Automation is where technology comes into play, and there are a lot of options out there, but this is where having that tech-savvy team leader is really essential. Fifth, keep the constraint fed. Remember, flow through the constraint is the primary bottleneck holding back your business. Time lost at the constraint is time lost to the entire company. So the goal of your other business units is to keep the constraint operating at full capacity all the time, rather than maximizing their own output. You can put a buffer ahead of it, so even with occasional disruptions and delays upstream, it will never be starved for work. Finally, look at ways to increase the capacity of the constraint. If you've optimized the constraint and it's still the limiting factor in your business, it might be time to invest in adding more resources, whether people or machines, to add capacity at that point. So you've found the constraint and you've optimized it. Don't forget to check your results and repeat. Let the process run for a month and compare results. Did you get more work through the constraint? Were you able to keep the constraint fed the whole time, or did it run out of work? If you've lifted the constraint, congratulations. Now it's time to find the next constraint. Don't let apathy become your new constraint. What is the biggest bottleneck in the system now? Okay, that was a whirlwind tour, so let's review. The theory of constraints says that your business is a goal-oriented system and its output is limited by a constraint or bottleneck. The only way to improve the overall output of the system is to increase the flow through the constraint. Your first task is to identify the constraint. We talked about some common ones that you will probably have to resolve first: allocating resources for the process of improvement, understanding your business as a system, and reducing the burden of unplanned work. To identify the next constraint, you'll want to look for where work is piling up in the organization or where the wheels will fall off first as the company grows. To optimize a constraint, document the process, then identify the most time-consuming parts. Prevent mistakes so work doesn't flow backwards. Reduce waste by subtraction, compaction, and automation. Keep the constraint fed at all times. And finally, if more was required, consider adding more people or machines to increase the capacity of the constraint. I hope you can see that this isn't a one-time process, but a process for continuous improvement. What I find so exciting is that it keeps you focused on what needs to change next in your business today. If you're interested in learning more, there's some great books on the topic. I've linked to the property management business flowchart that we looked at earlier, as well as a template for documenting a process and a link to these slides. I think we have some time for questions, but if you're interested in connecting, I've put my contact information below. Thanks for your attention.